Right. Good morning, everyone. And hope you're enjoying yourself so far. I'm very excited to be here with the Chicago Urban League and a great set of panelists. So we're going to get you started. My name is Matt Simpson, and I'm going to welcome you to our panel discussion about mental health and the impact that the pandemic has had on Black entrepreneurship. Like I said, we got a great panel here for you, and I want to start by introducing myself as well as our esteemed guests here. So my name is Matt Simpson. I work with the Illinois Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. I am in the Office of Minority Economic Empowerment. So our office works to support all of the high-level goals related to economic development in the state, but we have a special emphasis to support minorities, women, veterans, and individuals with disabilities. My role on the team is I'm the African American Business Development Manager. So I support Black business throughout the state, and I've had the pleasure of working with many of our panelists here today. So I'm going to start by just calling each of our panelists' name and allowing them a couple of minutes to further discuss who they are and what they do. I'll start with Ms. Eva Brown from U.S. Bank.
Hi, so good morning, everyone. Really excited to be here on the panel today to have a good, enriching discussion. Again, I'm Eva Brown, and I am the segment lead for minority and women-owned businesses at U.S. Bank, based here in Chicago. But essentially, my role is embedded in the consumer business banking group, and I am charged with developing a strategy about how the bank shows up and how do we become the bank of choice for minority and women-owned businesses. So that's really taking a look under the hood about looking at our products, our services, our sales strategy, and just making sure that we have a great offering for minority business owners, understanding what the barriers are and creating solutions to help overcome those. So I'm about 2 months in the job, really excited about the work. I've spent the majority of my career working with small businesses. So really excited about the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Brown. Now we're going to go to Dr. Rebecca Hubbard.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Also looking forward to this conversation. My name is Dr. Rebecca Hubbard. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, certified Kemetic yoga instructor, and the owner of Grounded Wellness. We are a small group practice on the south side of Chicago, located in Hyde Park, and we provide psychotherapy, health coaching, which is a relatively new addition, sport and performance psychology services, and self-care workshops for groups and businesses who are interested in changing their self-care culture. We are also connected to many other Black-owned businesses on the south side of Chicago and have developed those relationships all in service of wellness. So as a business owner myself, a lot of these topics are of interest to me, and we also support others in their wellness journeys.
Thank you very much, Doc. It's a pleasure to have you. Brother Jason Johnson.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Johnson. I am the director of the Small Business Network at Next Street, a mission-driven consultancy that mobilizes capital, customers and capabilities to support small businesses. My face may look familiar because I'm the previous director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Chicago Urban League. And as you all know, in the movement, once the Urban League, always an Urban Leaguer. So, here I am. So pretty much really excited about this conversation. My current work focuses on, mobilizing, different stakeholders within the small business ecosystem, the foundations, the corporations, the business support organizations to create a digital community to increase ecosystem coordination at scale, at a national level. But the work that I did at the League is near and dear to my heart. I'm really excited about this conversation, about this research that, the Chicago Urban League's Research and Policy Center is working on, and just, having an amazing discussion about a really important topic.
Thank you very much, brother. Last but not least, Sister Kenya Merritt.
Thank you so much, Matt. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenya Merritt. I am the Chief Small Business Officer with the City of Chicago. It's a lofty title, but essentially what that means is that I work on behalf of the business owners here in the city. And I help to support small business growth, and I do that through 3 ways. One is making sure that we have a pulse of what's happening with our small business owners, particularly business owners of color. When we get that information, we take it and we develop policy and initiatives that we hope will grow the landscape here in the city. And then lastly, I oversee a grants program where we provide funding to about 70 different business service organizations throughout the city to help promote growth in our neighborhoods.
All right. Thank each of you once again for sharing a little bit about yourselves. Just, hearing the backgrounds that we all represent, I know we're going to have some dynamic conversation. Before we get into the discussion, I want to remind attendees that you do have the opportunity to pose questions in the Q&A box. So there's a chat function. Please, as you're hearing our conversation, don't hesitate to drop those questions in the Q&A. There will be a time at the back end where we will engage your comments and questions. So please make sure you're using that Q&A function. Now we're going to get right into our conversation. So, 2020 was a wild ride for our businesses due to a global health pandemic. And we're 6 months in to 2021. And it seems that we're on a back end of something, but we just can't hold our breath, and especially for Black businesses, we know how impactful the pandemic has been. Our research tells us that the state of Illinois has 132,000 Black businesses. 11% of all the firms are Black firms. And they dominate industries such as personal services, which is beauty and barber, the food industry, which is restaurants, the arts and entertainment industry, and then the retail sector. And these 4 areas were pretty much decimated by the pandemic. Beauty and barbers had to shut down for months and months. Many of our restaurants are still trying to get a hold of themselves from trying to pivot to curbside service. The arts and entertainment industry is just now starting to open back up, and retail did all it could to hold on. So we know how impactful Black business, the pandemic has been on Black business. But we have financial experts, we have government experts, and nonprofit leaders. So I just want to ask each of you to weigh in about what you're hearing about the experience that entrepreneurs have had. I'll start with Jason.
Awesome.
During your time at the league, you worked closely with Black entrepreneurs. So what were some of the major challenges and stressors that they faced from your perspective?
So it was more of the same as far as some of the things that have systemically, impacted Black businesses, historically, in addition to some additional new challenges. And I'll kind of elaborate on what each of those buckets look like. So obviously the traditional ones, or the ones that's been around, for as long as we can remember, is the challenges, with access to capital. Some of it's systemic, due to, loan policies and practices and things like that. Some of it just due to lack of financial knowledge and understanding, access to management knowledge, as far as, business owners, having to pivot. A lot of times lifestyle businesses don't really, and Main Street businesses don't really have to, deal with, rapid changes in an environment as far as, either regulatory, or in this instance, the health environment. So that was a challenge. And then also access to new customers, when the ways that they typically got customers and the channels that they typically utilize were, decimated, disrupted. So those are some of the core challenges. So pretty much, and those have always been the case. Tons of research shows that those have long been some of the challenges that Black business owners face. But pretty much, the pandemic and the social unrest, the twin pandemic, as we like to call it, basically, just exacerbated those already existing issues, right? So pretty much when, people needed, recovery funds, and in the first round of PPP came out, there was a lot of business owners who didn't have their financial house in order, who couldn't take advantage of, that type of, the PPP loans. Or they were afraid to take them on just because they were afraid of, they didn't recognize or understand the forgiveness component of it also. So that's when, partners like Kenya, with the city of Chicago and Together Now grant, Matt's colleagues at DCEO, they came through with some grant money specifically focused on supporting, these entrepreneurs, and kind of, allowed them, a lot of these businesses to keep their doors open for an extended more period of time. But the access to capital component was a huge piece. And then access to management knowledge, right? So pretty much once the pandemic hit and a lot of people and the way people typically generated revenue was disrupted, there was a lot, some people were really, really creative and innovative and how they were able to, adjust, but a lot of business owners weren't. Like it was really, really a difficult challenge for them. And a challenge with the ecosystems in general, with the support ecosystems, unless you're kind of in the know and you've already been a client or you have relationships and connections, you don't know a lot of these resources, exist, like the Chicago Urban League's free business coaching or some of the other business support organizations across the city. So there was people who were sinking, didn't even realize that there was help that could help them deal with issues and challenges. And as a result, a lot of businesses unfortunately closed their doors. And then obviously marketing, having to be more creative and how they market it. That was also a major challenge on, trying to figure out how to get new customers and things like that. But then came the social unrest, and that just introduced a variety of other additional issues, because literally, a lot of business owners were afraid that, their particular, establishment was going to get damaged. And in some instances, there were, vandalization of people's, businesses and things like that. I know at the time I lived right off the 47th Street corridor, in Bronzeville, right where that Walmart is, et cetera, et cetera. And as a resident, I was afraid to go outside. Like you hear helicopters, you heard booming, you heard fighting, arguing, variety of things. And there were literally business owners who were, there was one business owner who has a business in that, and she was really considering spending the night in her business just to make sure that it was safe and secure. So, and Dr. Rebecca Hubbard will touch on some of the mental, the mental health aspects that come from those type of things. But those are some of the challenges that we've seen working with Black businesses during this situation, during this whole twin pandemic.
Okay, so I want to pivot to Sister Merritt, from the public sector side. What are some things that the city of Chicago did to try to, help support entrepreneurs during this crisis we've been in?
Yeah, for sure. So Jason touched on it a little bit, and the Urban League actually was an amazing partner from the onset in helping to create capital programs where we could meet business owners that we felt had the greatest need, that may not have been able to have access to the federal programs. So as Jason mentioned, when PPP opened up, we all know what happened, right? Like it was disproportionately allocated to businesses largely city center and on the north side, and larger businesses, some businesses that we question, like, are those small businesses? And so once we started to see where the funding was being allocated, one of the things that we were charged with was making sure that as we set up our capital programs, that we did so with an equity lens. And we were very intentional about it. And so one of the programs that we started initially was our micro business recovery grant, and that was targeted towards businesses that are largely in our Black and brown communities, business owners that had less than 5 employees, which represents a large percentage of our Black-owned businesses. And so we're very intentional about earmarking those funds to ensure that businesses had access to capital. And so to your point, Matt, many of our businesses are in sectors that were heavily impacted by the pandemic. And so what we wanted to do was to make sure that they had money in hands to continue to cover some of their fixed costs, right? Just because the doors was closed didn't mean that many of the landlords didn't give them a pass on their rent. And so we wanted them to be able to have some cash to be able to cover those expenses. And so we carried that same methodology and subsequent programs that we stood up. We stood up over $100 million in total last year, as well as supports. So going back to what Jason mentioned, we had a navigator program where businesses that were finding it challenging with navigating all of the different resources that were available to them, they could call one of our business navigators and they could help them through the process. But one thing that I wanted to mention, and Jason, don't kill me, I'm going to disagree with you in terms of just like financial house in order. Like, I totally agree to a certain extent, but I think that a lot of the challenges that many of our business owners face with not maybe having their financial house in order stems back to not being able to effectively have access to capital to start in the beginning.
So it sounds like, you know, we're doing a lot to stand up programming and to be an intervention. That's what I'm hearing. A lot of the challenges are having positive responses. So now I want to hear from Sister Eva. You know, you have a unique role inside of a financial institution. And I just want to hear some of the things that, you know, what did banks and those financial institutions do to try to support Black entrepreneurs during this crisis?
So I can start about what we didn't do. So we've heard that the dreaded 3 letters, at least in the financial institutions industry, PPP. And, you know, here to make no excuses, we just didn't do a good job in the beginning of making sure that we outreach to the smallest, most vulnerable businesses. And I think that came to light very early in the process, and we started to pivot. And once that kind of, we recognized that, I think a lot of financial institutions, the ones that I've worked with, and a lot of us do collaborate, we started to make some very specific outreach to organizations just to make sure that the businesses that they were working with had access to those PPP loans. Another thing that we also noticed is that some of these businesses just don't naturally come to the banks. So if you all were aware, in the second round of PPP, SBA made a very deliberate attempt to fund other organizations or give other organizations like Black-owned banks or community development financial institutions access to PPP loans. And banks, believe it or not, funded those institutions so that they were able to have capital on hand to be able to fund those PPP loans to get it into those businesses that need it the most. But I think from a financial institution standpoint, banks in general were very flexible with businesses that did have debt. From a payment perspective, you know, whether it be a pause on payments, I think that happened relatively quickly. Second, I think what most people have heard, there's been an unprecedented investment in organizations that support Black business. You've seen all the headlines, whether it be U.S. Bank with our $100 million commitment, or, you know, another bank, Bank of America, they all had it. All these investments, whether they go into Black-owned banks, community development financial institutions, one that we just announced at U.S. Bank was a $25 million Black Accelerator Fund. So this is capital that went into CDFIs that serve primarily Black-owned businesses. And then we made our largest grant ever to some of those Black-led CDFIs. So it's the African American Alliance for CDFI CEOs. So those are organizations that are led by Black people that help serve Black businesses. So I think you've seen financial institutions step up in a big way from a capital perspective, but then we've also, I think, provided capital for support services. So I think Jason and Kenya, you guys just had that exchange about not being prepared. A lot of investments from banks went into how do we better help business owners be prepared? So what are some of those tools that business owners need so that when these opportunities do come up like PPP, that they have the systems in place to be able to easily access their information and access those resources. So we've made a lot of investments in funding a lot of the programming, a lot of the great work, just like the Chicago Urban League has done, and collaborate with them so that we're making sure that we're reaching those customers.
That's awesome. So, you know, Jason, you acknowledged those challenges: access to capital, access to management knowledge, just kind of being hit by a semi truck that is the pandemic, and then the social rest on top of that. And then we discussed some of those interventions in the programming, Sister Kenya Merritt and her navigator efforts at the City of Chicago, a lot of the grants that we stood up from the state level at DCO. Then our Sister Eva, I think it was important to acknowledge how PPP was rolled out and how you adjusted to make it right and do what we can to serve our businesses with some very specific outreach, and then funding CDFIs to get those dollars to the people who need it most. I want to go to Dr. Hubbard now. As a business owner, you know, as a Black woman entrepreneur, you understand firsthand, you know, the reward and the stress that comes with being an entrepreneur. But, you know, given these times that we're in, it's really unique in terms of stress on a person trying to operate a business. So I just like for you to share, you know, what are the impact on the entrepreneur of some of these stressors, and how does it, you know, affect our ability to do business?
Absolutely. Well, for one, I'm not exempt from those stressors, right? So all of the things that you're sharing, I was experiencing myself, and needing to pivot, needing to shift our practice to go completely virtual. I feel very fortunate that we're in an industry where that was relatively easy, but really only relatively speaking, because it was still difficult to adjust to changing our way of doing business in that way. And so I empathize with business owners who have even more barriers in place to pivoting that business. I will also say that I think this pandemic exposed patterns and cultural norms for how people do business that were unhealthy to begin with, and then became completely unsustainable during the pandemic. So I commend the Urban League for the survey that you put out, because I think it also shows people that they're not alone in some of the things that they experienced, like brain fog, mood swings, increased anxiety and depression. All of these are really a result of chronic stressors without adequate coping mechanisms or relief. And some of the skills that are needed, in addition to financial knowledge, access to capital and resources, is also an understanding of how to take care of our own mental health. Unfortunately, the stigma in our Black community is still very real around mental health. It's getting much better, but there are still people who believe that this is not something that they are allowed to struggle with, or put it in a compartment where this isn't something that Black people have time or the luxury to do. Self-care and taking care of your mental wellness is not a luxury. And I think, unfortunately, there were many business owners and entrepreneurs that had to learn that the hard way last year, because if the business owner isn't healthy, then the business can't operate, especially for entrepreneurs and very small businesses. Illness or difficulties running day-to-day operations means the business isn't running. So it's a crucial resource is the owner, is you. And so taking care of yourself is not, or shouldn't be, an afterthought. Another thing that I observed was this idea of hustling hard and pushing through, no sleep, and that we traditionally high-five each other for things like that. We admire people who hustle so hard that they sleep 2 hours a night, when really we should start challenging those patterns and behaviors and find other solutions for working through these problems. Working efficiently as opposed to just working hard can be something that we value and appreciate. So I think the acute stressors that we observed that spiked in the pandemic are things that most people and most business owners have enough resources to respond to. It's the chronic nature of racism, the chronic nature of this pandemic, and the fact that there's no let up to the stressor that makes this so difficult to deal with, which means that coping skills should be at an all-time high. When I say daily coping skills, absolutely it means meeting with a therapist. Of course, I'm a little biased when it comes to that, but it also means all the things that you do every day. Are you taking care of the food that you eat? Are you hydrated? Are you sleeping? Are you using your mindfulness skills and exercises? These things were not habits for most people. And so that turned into a more difficult burden when this additional stressor of the pandemic affected us all. I'll say from personal experience, I fell into that trap too. It took me a couple of months to realize that I was approaching burnout, and then I had to scale down some of the things that were happening in the business to take care of myself. I had to slow down in order to make sure that I was okay, and particularly in a field where I'm caring for other people. You know, it is a big protection from being a hypocrite. The fact that I talk about self-care so much, I have to check in with myself quite regularly about whether I'm doing that for myself. And I had to shift that too. I also think that hopefully this is motivating folks to think about how they promote wellness for their employees or within their business, that we can be leaders in more than one way. When we're thinking about what we're creating for the next generation, it's not just wealth. It's not just money. It's also an attitude towards what we deserve and what kind of life we deserve to live. And that includes living in a healthy body, mind, and soul.
Dr. Hubbard, you always drop bombs. I love when you talk about the culture. You know, I'm big on this idea of culture, especially Black people, how unique and powerful we are in innovating solutions to our challenges. I love how you said, you know, we revealed those norms that were unhealthy, and then you posed better options for us. You know, you talked about working efficient, not just hustling hard. You talked about our diet, which is crucial, getting sleep, hydrating, and then leading in ways that model healthy behaviors for our team and for our families. And, you know, I love how you talked about wealth being more than just money. It's about an attitude. And this, I also consider legacy a function of wealth, how we can pass on healthy behaviors and attitudes to our people. So I love what you just gave us there. Brother Johnson, you touched on this twin pandemic earlier. Mm-hmm. So I want to get into that. And I want to pose this to the whole panel. You know, we're hearing a lot about, you know, this health crisis in terms of COVID-19, but also the longstanding issues of systemic racism in America, and also, you know, wherever Black people are on the globe. You know, these are roadblocks to our opportunities. These are challenges to our success. You know, so I want to hear from us, you know, these twin pandemics, the health crisis and the racism. You know, I want you guys to speak on that. You know, how does that impact our businesses, this twin pandemic piece? Like, how should we consider that as we try to support our businesses, and how does it impact our businesses? This is for everybody.
So I'll say that I think the social unrest in particular impacted Black businesses a lot more than businesses of other groups. Pretty much, number one, there's a personal connection to, you know, what happened with Mr. Floyd and what's been going on, you know, with, challenges with, you know, the law enforcement system and things like that. I think all of us saw a relative murdered that day when we saw George Floyd, treated the way he was treated and murdered. So it was that emotional toll, right? First and foremost. So, you know, there's a personal element to it, and then there's a business element to it. That personal element is like, why does this continue to happen? You know, it stirs up anger. It stirs up frustration. It may stir up pessimism, and skepticism. I mean, that's the reason I think you're seeing a lot of, distrust as far as, trusting that, okay, this new administration is going to do something different than previous administrations did, because the folks that we voted for, still didn't have our best interests in the past. So why is this going to be any different? So first of all, is that personal thing that we're dealing with, right? But then when it comes to the business side of things, we're in a lot of times, Black businesses, were number one in communities where a lot of the social unrest, took place, right? Number two, Black businesses were in industries that were most greatly impacted by, the social distancing, requirements and everything, like you stated, retail, personal services, food and beverage, all of those were the ones where there was the biggest impact. And that's where we primarily are as far as business owners, right? So the twin pandemic touched us personally. And then so the social unrest and that component touched us personally. It touched our pocketbooks as far as like vandalism, long-term increase of insurance rates, and then just certain businesses not returning to certain communities after, after they were damaged and things like that. And then, the actual health component of it, COVID-19, you know, the issues with, you know, a lot of our businesses having to be shuttered or closed temporarily or for long. And, you know, for a business, 2 weeks of being closed could completely, you know, in their existence. I think I saw a study where it's only like 14% of businesses had 2 weeks of cash reserves, you know, to thrive, you know, and to hold up for issues or challenges. So those are the kind of the core areas that touch Black businesses in particular.
Yeah, and I'll just add to Jason's comment, like the ability to have cash on hand was a direct correlation to sustainability, right? So whereas, you know, our white counterparts, I think that study said that they had, you know, close to 45 days cash reserves in comparison to Black business owners. We were around a 2-week period, and some people will even venture to say less, right? And so that's a direct correlation into how long our businesses were able to keep their doors open or even open at all, right? And so when we went into the pandemic and we literally had to shut down and quarantine, and businesses had no way to generate revenue, but they still had these fixed costs, our businesses were drastically hurt by that. I will also add that where we see systemic issues or challenges is also in ownership, right? And I'm talking about ownership in terms of the property. So many of our business owners lease or rented their properties. In many cases, their landlords were not willing to give them a break. And so they still had these costs that they were incurring for being in that space. And so, you know, all of these things were compounded with our businesses being able to stay open. And I know that we're maybe going to talk a little bit later about potential solutions, but I think ownership is definitely a pathway for us to be able to have our own and to be in a better position.
I'll add one observation also about the overlap of those pandemics is the deep mistrust in our communities of, you know, government, I'll say in general. We see that now with vaccine hesitancy, people, and this hesitancy is there for a very good reason. You know, there has been a long history of being exploited and misused. And I think that might even translate to some of the hesitancy or confusion we saw around the PPP loans. They're really giving away money just like that, and then it's free money. I'm not so sure that that's real. So I think this mistrust is justified, but I think events like this, and I'm very appreciative of this panel and seeing people in these high-level organizations, government officials, who I can hear have our best interests in mind, which is not something I personally would assume when I think about the city of Chicago or, you know, or larger governments. And so I think continuing to make it clear that not everything that comes from large organizations is bad, that there are ways to build trust back with the community. I think that's something we'll have to focus on both for physical health and for the health of the businesses.
The only thing I'll add, if there's ever a such thing as a silver lining with a situation like this, is I think it did bring light to these systemic barriers and challenges in a way that has not been done before. I can say working, you know, within the banking institutions and starting to read the statistics about Black businesses, their size, you know, the industries that they're in, it was definitely an eye opener, which I think will drive a different set of solutions that I know that we're talking about later in this panel.
I'm sorry, Matt, just really
go ahead. Go ahead.
Like, Eva, that is so spot on. Can I just tell you, it's no longer equity is no longer a foreign word, right? Like in spaces like this where we're with people of color, like we could have that conversation and we can understand and we empathize and, you know, we know, but now it's refreshing that like when you have these conversations, it's no longer giving like a whole lesson before you start to have a conversation about like how we need to think differently about moving forward, that people are starting to understand the reasons why we need to think about moving forward differently.
So these are great responses. I just want to touch on a couple of things. I love, Sister Mary, when you talk about ownership, and you know how important it is to control the asset, so you're not moved by the waves, so you can, you know, withstand the waves and even make your own waves. I think that's a really important part of our process where we get to talking about solutions, controlling those assets. And I love how, Dr. Hubbard, you mentioned, you know, those of us on the inside, we deal with a lot of mistrust because, and it's all earned. Like you said, sister, it's all earned. You know, there's been nice people who have good intentions that have done a lot of damage. And we have to deal with that head on and keep showing up with integrity and let our people know that this isn't a game to us. You know, we're really serious about solutions and extending power to people. And, you know, we deal with it every day at the state. You know, we try to show up and literally get profane responses on phone calls because of the things that have happened to people. And, but, you know, I know all the people on this call won't fold, and we're standing up to provide support to our people. And that's that twin pandemic rearing its head. You know, we're still reeling from the systemic issues, and then we get hit by a pandemic. So we got to just deal with that and not stop. Great responses there. So before we get into the Q&A, we got another question for all of you, and we've began to lean into solutions. I love that. That's our orientation on this panel. That's our orientation as a people back to our culture. You know, we're all about solutions. So I want to just talk about each of you, allow for each of you to share some lessons that you've learned from these past year and a half, some best practices, some solutions, some strategies that we can take with us as we continue to fight this good fight. So I want to hear from each of you.
All right. I hope you want to go first, Kenya? Ladies first.
You can go. Oh,
no,
okay.
Ladies first.
Okay, I'll go.
Ladies first. Ladies first.
Mm-hmm. I will say that one of the things that pleasantly surprised me very early on in the pandemic was coordination. And I think particularly in Chicago, like we saw this crises, and you just have this like sense of people wanting to help, right? Like, and Jason, I don't know if you remember, but like very early on, we would have like brainstorming sessions or conversations around how do we set up these capital programs in a way that removes barriers. Like that would have never been a conversation before. How do we make it simple? How do we ensure that like we're meeting the need of those that traditionally have been left behind, right? And so I am encouraged by that. I hope that it was just not for a moment, but that we continue to have those conversations around how do we start to turn the tide and start to do things differently. Personally, for government, I think that we could be an example. I think that we could lead by example in how we support and how we help businesses of color. And that's across the board, from support to contracts to how do we even leverage our bully pulpit in areas where we may not have the ability to be able to do like direct lending, right? Can we use our bully pulpit and working with financial institutions to be a little bit more flexible in their lending practices, right? Are there ways for us to leverage this moment to start to think creatively and innovatively around how do we start to transform policies and systems, not only within the government, but the private sector as well? So I think that over the past 15 months, has given us an opportunity to see things differently. But now we have to continue to move beyond the conversations and start to do the hard work of transforming our systems, our policies, our processes to make things better for folks.
So pretty much, I think a point that Eva brought up, like in the last, during the last question, was the fact that the silver lining is that everybody knows that this is a problem. Now, And what do they say? The first step, the first part of a solution is recognizing that there's a problem. So I used to have this presentation that I used to do called The Business of Inequality. And I would do this presentation. I did it for our impact class. So I was part of the Impact Leadership Development Program. But, the Entrepreneurship Center director usually speaks, and I created the presentation for that particular session. But I found that it was a very useful educational tool when talking to, other partners, et cetera, to educate them on the unique challenges that Black businesses have, right? So prior to the pandemic, everything was minority businesses, minority and women-owned businesses, right? But there's unique challenges that African American and Black businesses have that other groups do not have. When you look at annual gross receipts, $58,000 a year for Black businesses compared to $129,000 for Latinx businesses, $500,000 for white-owned businesses, right? Huge disparity, right? When you look at the number of when you look at the number of the annual revenue of Black businesses, I think Black businesses only get 0.5% of all business revenue, and only make up 9% of all businesses when, we're at 13% of the population, and we should be at parity, right? So all of these numbers should be, okay, we should have 13% of the business revenue. We should have 13% of the businesses. We should be creating 13% of the jobs, but we're not at parity for that reason, because the Black businesses output should be matching the amount of black people that is in the adult population, but it's not. And so now that people know that this is a problem, I can retire my Business and Inequality, presentation. I could retire it because a lot of people are aware now, right? So then we can get into talking about, solutions, right? And some of the barriers that I mentioned, access to capital, access to management knowledge, access to new markets and new networks, simply creating interventions to address those challenges. I know a survey that the University of that Chicago State did, and I know they're in the process of us and DCOs, and I used to be us, but I'm still Urban Leaguer, but the Chicago Urban League and the state of Illinois, and the DCOs working on the first iteration of that survey found that the biggest challenge that Black businesses had was actually access to management knowledge. That was like their biggest concern. I think they did a survey on the 95th Street corridor, the businesses in that corridor, and they found the management knowledge was a bigger issue than the capital. And for those of you who are in the financial space, the access to the management knowledge typically leads to some of the challenges with the capital, right? So pretty much those are I think access to like figuring out ways to help business owners get better acclimated with how to run business, because a lot of Black business owners are first generation entrepreneurs, creating more equitable policies in the private sector as far as for banks and and the public sector as far as loans, grants, to more equitable policies for access to capital. And then helping business owners get access to new networks, management knowledge, networks, relationships through procurement, et cetera, would be, ways to address those. And, the SBA recognizes the importance of this with their National Community Navigators program. Other organizations are doing some of those things as well. So I'm just excited to see, how we take advantage of this moment and how we can better support Black businesses.
So I'll jump in, and Jason, you took a lot of my thunder, but I'll say from a banking point of view, and we touched on this earlier, especially during the PPP process, banks, we've got a lot to do about rebuilding trust building, I should say, trust within the Black community. And I think you see a lot of banks stepping up and trying to really think about what are solutions that are really for that segment. And I can point to at least US Bank. I'm the first in my role, which is a segment lead specifically for minority women-owned businesses. So that to me points to the importance of the segment. And not only is it just minority women-owned businesses, we're going to have a segmented strategy for each group within that segment, focusing on Blacks, because to your point, minority businesses aren't a monolith, and they're going to require different solutions depending on the problem. So as it relates to Black businesses, just as Jason mentioned, we know there are 3 common barriers. So as banks, access to capital, that's on us. We can make investments in CDFIs, Black banks, but we've also got to look under our own hood and look at our own underwriting and our own products and really start understanding, what are some of the things that are really holding us back from being able to be aggressive in that space. And that means collaborating with other banks, looking at how do we use data differently. So we're looking at those type of things. So that's from an access to capital perspective. Additionally, I think it is our role to think about other forms of capital. So we know there's a huge gap as it relates to venture capital. How do we as banks continue to make investments so that there are more capital available to get to those Black businesses? I think access to information is also important. So again, it goes back to making sure that it's relevant for our segment. So as a bank, are we supporting programs? Do we have content? So we talked about those industries that Black businesses where we're prevalent. Does our education, does our activities really mirror that? So we need to make sure of that. And then lastly is access to connections, as Jason said. So you think about supplier diversity. I think about this one roundtable that I went to and we're like, oh, well, we want to help businesses and give education. And he frankly said, I don't want education. I'm educated. I need business. So how do we put ourselves in a position to be able to offer business development opportunities for Black businesses? So I think those are the solutions or the direction that we're going to solutions. And I think financial institutions, frankly, and rightfully so, we have a big role to play in that.
These solutions have me inspired and excited. I can't wait to see what's coming. The solution I'd like to offer is probably a smaller task and hopefully something that each business owner can do themselves without any outside help, is to cultivate a habit of self-reflection. Cultivate some type of rhythm where you sit down and sit with yourself, no distractions, phone is on do not disturb, and it doesn't have to be for a very long time. You have 20 minutes somewhere, I'm sure. To sit down and reflect on your mental health, reflect on the health of your business, and really try to sit there and be honest with yourself. Don't fake it for anyone. Do this alone and see what you find and see what you uncover once you've cultivated this habit. I'll say like maybe once a week at minimum, because our self-care fluctuates. How we take care of our mental wellness changes. Don't focus so much on finding the one thing or like this particular set of habits, or I have to go to the gym 3 times a week, or anything that's that rigid is going to expire. It's going to have to be revamped and redone. The only thing that always has to be in place is self-reflection. Sometimes that can happen with a therapist, but you can also do that alone. So I really hope that what we're talking about today and what we saw in the video about the Urban League survey shows that mental wellness cannot be an afterthought. It needs to be one of those things you check off when you're planning your business. How am I going to take care of my mental wellness and of my overall wellness in this business structure? Not later, not when the business is successful, not when you've made X amount of money, but throughout the whole process. How are you going to take care of yourself? Even asking yourself that question, I think, is leading us in a bright future.
And I just want to touch on the mental health component just from a personal perspective. So I do transcendental meditation twice a day. And I noticed that it sets the tone for everything else. I know when I do TM, I'm working out more. When I do TM, I'm sharper, at work. And literally, I think a lot of business owners got to look at this beyond just, oh, it's interrupting my day. It's actually enhancing your ability to perform, right? It's not something that you just got to set aside to do. It's an asset to do these things, right? Some of these things that Dr. Hubbard is mentioning, and they all play off of each other, right? The mental, plays off the physical, plays off the spiritual, and they all go hand in hand, right? And if you have a deficit in one, it's gonna impact the others, So and the thing is it literally makes a difference. Because I know during that March period when we had to mobilize because I mean, literally, you know, we had to close, but then we were having partnership with conversations with Kenya, state of Illinois on how we were going to mobilize to support businesses. And literally, if I wasn't doing my TM, like I would have just lost my mind. So like literally, like take your mental health, you know, take your emotional health very, very seriously and leverage and look at it as an asset to, you know, your business and not something that gets in the way of it.
So I just want to, Dr. Herbert, when you talk about this is something that we can do for ourselves, that do for self is like music to my ears. I appreciate you kind of using that language. And honestly, this is what this whole conversation is about. It's about self-determination. You know, it's not about resting on our heels and waiting for somebody to sweep us off our feet. And our job as insiders is to put our people in position to win. And that's what we're talking about with these solutions. I just want to drop in a little bit of a commercial for some of the work we're doing at the Department of Commerce, Office of Minority Economic Empowerment. Once a quarter, I convene a group of Black business development organizations from across the state. We call it the Black Business Collective. So it's about 50 organizations from across the state. And what happens is it's a platform for information sharing and network building. And one of the most beautiful things I've seen come out of it is like us being able to step out of the way and these groups sharing information on grants that they hear about, implementing programs on the ground. There's a sister in Chicago that shared info with another one in Carbondale. And the Carbondale group was able to convene businesses and implement this banking program to get dollars into those businesses, commit to those hands. And that came from that convening that we're doing, trying to set that space for collaboration. So these are the solutions that we're all working to build. And I think that we're stepping in the right direction as a group of insiders and leaders. So I did get a question from the audience, and I think this is a really good one I want to pose to all of us. You know, we've seen a lot of large corporations and entities make these statements about racial equity, you know, and commitments to racial equity. So I want to know from your perspective, you know, how do we turn that language, like you said, Eva, into real business? You know, what are some of the things that we could be doing to help these statements translate into real business for our people?
I know one of the things that I did, you know, when I was director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at the Urban League is working with these businesses. Like, you know, once we have those conversations, we have those statements, is like, put your money where your mouth is, put your effort where your mouth is, right? So one of the things that I want to plug for Chicago Urban League is the Next One program that's launching on June 10th. It's a Black business accelerator that helps African-American businesses scale their ventures. There's, you know, MBA level education and support, you know, as far as, you know, learning, you know, core business, you know, principles and techniques. And then what the big piece is the procurement labs, where, you know, these corporate partners are going to be connecting with Black businesses, you know, in the cohort specifically for the purpose of, you know, doing business, not a conversation about, oh, this is how you do, you know, business with our organization, like a technical assistance type of, you know, relationship, but literally for the sole purpose of doing business. So far, there's definitely been a major commitment from Boeing, you know, financially, and, you know, the desire to, you know, support, you know, the businesses, you know, Hyatt, a variety of other organizations. So, but none of that wouldn't have happened unless, you know, the president and CEO of the Chicago Urban League, Karen Freeman Wilson, challenged folks, you know, reached out to organizations and said, hey, this is what we're doing. You know, I mean, this is what your statements are. You need to, you know, definitely, you know, put this statement into action and to relationships. And what we found was a lot of organizations were more than willing to. I think they need to know how they can help. And, you know, as, you know, business support, you know, organizations, as, you know, grassroots organizations, we needed to be able to articulate that to them because they're not on the ground, right? They're not on the ground. You know, they want to help, but like they need guidance from organizations like the Chicago Urban League and, you know, other organizations like that's in the Black Business Collective, for example, you know, to really figure out what they can do. But I think that's how we take advantage of it, is like, okay, all right, you saying this, you know, put you to work. This is what we need you to do. So, yeah.
And I'll just add, just like in terms of some of these corporations holding true to their commitments, like government can really be an example of how we procure goods and how we engage Black-owned businesses. And one of the ways that I think we're starting to do it here at the City of Chicago is unbundling large contracts, right? And so we're starting to see that with some of our aviation contracts where there's opportunities to bid on projects that are smaller rather than these large contracts where many of our businesses wouldn't have the capacity to be able to do it. And so just thinking differently about procurement, while it may be easier to engage one contractor, given the opportunity to multiple contractors opens the door for minorities.
And then while you touch on the procurement, I think, you know, a lot of organizations have their particular procurement process, right? But based on what we've learned, we know there's specific and unique barriers to how, you know, the African-American businesses face in particular, right? So I think a great opportunity for a lot of, you know, procurement departments and corporations and governments is to kind of look at, you know, how they can make their policies more inclusive as opposed to restrictive, right? You know, and, you know, programs like the Next One program are helping to develop that pipeline, right? So maybe the organization doesn't have the capacity to, you know, to build the, you know, to really build that pipeline or to help, you know, some of the organizations in their pipeline with capacity, et cetera, but they can partner with organizations like the Chicago Urban League, those CMSDC and other organizations, you know, to kind of be strategic at how they bring Black businesses into their pipeline. But I think, you know, a great start would also, when you look at procurement, is making their policies more inclusive rather than restrictive.
Agree. And I think that it starts with commitment, right? Like, it's not going to be easy. And so, yeah, it's easy to say as a corporation, like, we're going to invest $100 million over the next 2 years in Black-owned businesses. But how does that translate into like the actual work, right? And so I think that's where we start to see the breakdown, right? People have these lofty goals and they felt really good about making these statements. I think for the point of just getting money back into their systems. But they make these statements, but when it comes to the work, right, like it goes by the wayside. And so I think it's holding people accountable to their commitments. But to your point, Jason, I think there is an opportunity to coordinate with organizations like the Urban League, like the Minority Supplier Council, that can often act as a bridge for many of our Black-owned businesses to be able to have access to these opportunities.
I love what you talked about, you know, modeling from the public sector side, modeling how to make it happen. And then, Brother Jason, what you talked about, like advocating and making sure the language in these statements translates, you know, the grassroots organizations like us and our partners being at the table to really translate that and make it real. So I think those are really good. Eva, I got a question for you. One challenge that Black entrepreneurs can face is less savings and wealth on the front end to seed their businesses. And for some entrepreneurs, lower credit scores or lighter credit histories. So how will banks be more flexible in assessing the risk reward of investing in these entrepreneurs?
So to answer the question directly, the how, we don't know yet. But what I do know and what I can say is I do think that's a very good point. And one of the things that banks that we're very closely regulated. And so one of the things I think I'm happy about is that the OCC and the other regulators understand these barriers as well, and they've been very proactive in convening banks to really look at these different barriers and how can, as a collective, come up with some different kind of tools to be able to help solve for them. So one good example, OCC pulls together what they call Project REACH. So it stands for Roundtable for Economic Access and Change. And so there's a lot of large banks, a lot of large national organizations, including the National Urban League, that really, they came together to promote financial inclusion. And with that, they're looking at different things like thin credit files, alternative sources of data. How can that be used to make underwriting decisions? So I would say the work is ongoing, and I do think in the future, you'll start seeing some more of these flexibilities.
I would say I would love to talk to you more about Project REACH. That's actually something that we tried to get into at the Black Business Collective, you know, helping businesses respond to these standards and ways to build their credit and find partners to fund some of these opportunities. So that sounds very exciting. Dr. Hubbard, we have a question for you. How does burnout and feeling tapped out affect productivity? Is it not just in our minds that we feel tapped out, or, you know, or that we have a harder time thinking and planning and working? They said it feels like it's in our mind, but how do we push back against a culture that seems to demand that we get over this burnout and make it happen?
Yes, thank you for that question. The mind and the body are not separate. They're together. We separate them. We try to pretend like they're separate, but they're not. And so stress is one of those ways where we face that in an undeniable way. Chronic stress leads to burnout, and stress is spikes what we call a cortisol hormone, a stress hormone in our bodies. That hormone reduces memory, makes concentration more difficult, drains our energy, because it's really intended more as a acute situation type of hormone, as a here's a rush of energy to get through this very specific short-term situation, and then the body gets rid of it, processes it, and we're back to baseline. With chronic stressors and not being able to cope with or down-regulate our nervous system, we stay in constant stress and the cortisol just keeps pumping out. That tiredness is not just in your mind. It is not just something that can be overcome with willpower and motivation. It's not laziness. It is a physiological and biological reality. So that knowledge hopefully helps us find a little bit more compassion for when we experience that burnout, because the fact that it impacts productivity is a biological inevitability. It is not your fault. And so when we talk about challenging these things in our culture, and I love that that is also part of the question, because we are fighting against a lot. But as Black folks, we do that all the time anyway. We're fighting against norms of white supremacy and white people in general and of racism. We know how to sustain and build our own new culture. And so we can do that with this too, meaning start really small with other business owners who you know or people who you count as your accountability partners. Have a conversation about what are the mental health and the wellness norms we want to establish. How can we challenge each other when we slip into the rhetoric of like hustle hard, sleep later? Can you please hold me accountable that when I sound like that, can you stop me? Can you ask me to take better care of myself? And when we do that for each other, when we have even just 2 people in your circle who do that for you, I promise you other people will want to be part of it too, because you're going to see results in your business, you're going to see results in how you feel, and that is going to show. So I think it is about thinking much, much smaller and thinking about how you can change the culture within your very, very close vicinity. That can bolster you against those other messages from the outside, because then it's not, you know, yourself against the culture, but it's our subculture against the larger culture. And that already feels better.
I love the communal nature even of your, you know, response. You know, how can we connect with people to help us push back against it? I'm not by myself. We've never been by ourselves. We are a village. That village mentality bleeding into our entrepreneurship is going to be crucial. One more question for Jason and Kenya. We know that the pandemic has challenged the environment for existing business owners and entrepreneurs, but for existing business owners and entrepreneurs. But what about those people who haven't even started up yet? You know, what would you say about this time in terms of an opportunity to start a new business? Is this the right time right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. And I think it's a direct correlation to just some of the things that Dr. Hubbard shared today. I think that the pandemic has allowed us to be more reflective of how we work and how we live and move in this space. And I think that a lot of people have been thinking about like their jobs and wanting to do something differently. So what we've seen, honestly, is an increase in the number of people starting businesses, right? Wanting to shift and change that dynamic in their life, maybe revisit some dreams that they've had before. But I think being at home, locked in your home for a while, has forced us to reflect on where we are and what we're doing, and most importantly, why. So yeah, we've seen an increase in the number of people exploring and also actually starting their own business now.
I would say this is the perfect time to launch a business. So the thing is, one of the best times to launch a business is when there is opportunity, right? So what ended up happening for a lot of existing businesses, the way their business model was structured, the pandemic disrupted it. And some of them had to adjust and make changes and things like that. As a new business owner, you already kind of see what the current environment and the climate is and where things are going. Things are going more digital. Since things are going more digital, it's less expensive to launch something digitally than it is to have a brick and mortar, right? There's new problems that were created by the pandemic as well, right? So literally, if you identify what some of the new pain points that the pandemic has caused, right, and align your venture, and the value proposition that your venture is going to offer with some of those new pain points, then you can address, you can have a very successful business. I'll use an example, just something that everybody's familiar with now is Versus, right? Pretty much Versus wouldn't existed if people wasn't locked in the crib. Like if people weren't locked in the house, nobody about to sit on Instagram and watch Versus, when we could go outside, go to the Taste of Chicago, all of that stuff, right? But we were locked in the house, right? Timberland and Swiss Beats came together and was like, man, let's just have a battle for the people, right? We're able to turn that into a whole business model, was acquired by Apple and was able to give all of the performers on Versus equity in the business, right? And it's here to stay. Like that's going to be here to stay. That's something that's permanent. But that opportunity wouldn't have existed prior to the pandemic, right? So there's new problems, there's new pain points that are being created that exist now that, you have the benefit because you didn't have to adjust. You already kind of see what the climate is like now, and you can align your new business with that. Like for some people, they might have said, man, I should have started this business last year, but now they're like, I'm glad I didn't start it last year. And now they have the opportunity to, do something different.
I love the Versus idea. The Versus example. I love the Versus example because it's taken over, in terms of culture, production. It's the art and
we wouldn't have been watching Versus.
You're right.
The pandemic.
You're absolutely right.
That opportunity would never existed.
I just wanted to add, I prefer the Versus where their internet messed up in their home versus just my preference.
Yeah, we got amazing memories due to this Versus as well. I want to pose a question. Our researchers told us that I mentioned 11% of firms in Illinois are Black-owned, 132,000 firms. But an interesting point is just over 3% of those businesses have employees. So of 132,000 Black businesses in our state, a little bit over 4,000 have employees, meaning that many of our people are doing it alone. Our solopreneurs, maybe they do some 1099 work, but they don't have a team. They don't have a staff to help them advance the business. And Dr. Hubbard, you mentioned, that village mentality and trying to overcome our challenges. But I just like to pose for these last few moments, what are some things that we can do, from each of our perspectives to help our businesses? Because so many of us are alone in these efforts.
I'll jump in because that's something I'm definitely looking at in my role at the bank is, non-employer firms versus employer firms. And why that's so important is that we know that Black businesses tend to hire Black people. So it has that multiplier effect, right? So if we can grow these businesses, they add employees, we're building wealth, creating, good paying jobs, things like that. So I think a couple of things that we can do is one, it's about that sustainable growth. And I know we've talked about that a lot in this panel. Is before you're adding employees, you have to make sure there's a sustainable growth plan. So I think pointing entrepreneurs in the right direction when it comes to economic outlook, kind of what's happening out there, where are the business opportunities is a really big part of it, right? So that's, for those businesses that, we concentrate in healthcare, for example, but we have a lot of one-person firms. We know that that industry has a lot of opportunity. How do we start pointing entrepreneurs in that direction so that they can grow? And I think a lot of it also is on the front end of the funnel. And we talked a little bit about this earlier in the panel. We tend to go into industries that are smaller, and they are one-person operation shops. So how do we, again, start changing the tide to get people to go into those industries that do grow faster so that there can be more employment opportunities? So I think there's education on the front end for people that are wanting to become entrepreneurs, want to enter. And then for those who are there, what are some of those sustainable solutions that can help them grow responsibly?
One of the things that I would love to see Black businesses do in particular to help them scale. So there's two ways. Money goes two ways, right? Money comes out of the business as far as expenses. Money comes in through revenue, sales, et cetera, right? One of the things I would love to see Black businesses take advantage of, and I've had a couple conversations. Kenya, I think I had this conversation with you and Rosa before. Communes. I would love to see Black businesses leverage communes, right? For a couple different reasons. Number one of the primary ways that to save on costs, of goods and things like that is if you can buy more. So let's say you have a commune of like 30 barbers, buying barber supplies. That reduces the overall cost for all of those individual barbers. Or you have, 30 mini marts or restaurants or caterers all, together purchasing products that they all need in mass. That's going to help reduce costs. I would love to see like right now, a lot of our businesses have to use delivery instead of using Uber or, Uber Eats or like Grubhub. Form a commune where you hire a delivery driver. You all, put a little portion in to pay the delivery drivers and save that money. And, then you're able to scale that way. I would love to see us leverage communes more. I think there's a huge opportunity for us to do that. So if somebody in the audience, wants to do that, hey, I don't own it, but I think it's something that definitely needs to be done.
I love that idea. And I hate to cut you off, Eva, but we got a short window and we got one more question that I want to make sure we get in because it's a question about family and just speaking to culture and entrepreneurship. I want us to talk a little bit about family. So we did get into, many of us are non-employer firms. We're doing it alone. This question is for Dr. Hubbard. Many of us are go it alone business people, and we run our businesses that way. Would you say that including family, maybe from a mental health perspective, including family would be a good solution or intervention, or how should we consider our family as we run our business?
I love the question. It's a complicated answer because it depends on the family. There's not going to be one right answer for every family. I'll say this, if you are considering getting help through your family, that should not mean there are no contracts, clear guidelines, boundaries. Everything should be as if you're hiring someone who's not a family member, because that is also in service of the business. So, family shouldn't mean that it just should really only just change the relationship, but it shouldn't change anything about the nuts and bolts of what it would mean to hire that person. It should still be done in the proper ways. In part because I think what we dream of when we think about a family business is the commitment, the loyalty, the collaboration, the warmth, and the genuineness of the relationship. It also comes with conflicts that are unique to families. And so I would think about that depending on your particular family.
So we are just about at time. Now, I want to real quick acknowledge all of our panelists who did an amazing job building on this topic. I always talk about building on the positive and destroying the negative. What we did was build on really addressing the challenges related to mental health and Black entrepreneurship. And I think that we had a great set of experts, subject matter experts, Sister Eva Brown, segment leader for minority and women-owned businesses at U.S. Bank, Dr. Rebecca Hubbard, clinical psychologist and founder of Rounded Wellness, LLC, Jason Johnson, who is the director of the Small Business Network at Next Street, and Kenya Merritt, the Chief Small Business Officer for the City of Chicago. So we talked about challenges. I think we dealt with that twin pandemic piece of racism and the health crisis, but then we got into solutions and lessons. And I love that they were all communal in nature. They were dynamic. Brother Johnson even gave out a startup idea for the communes out there. So that was a free gem that he tossed out. I think that the panelists did a lot to make sure our attendees can walk away with some tools in our tool belt, so we can really come together and save ourselves as we've done since the beginning of time. So with that, I know we have a hard stop. I want to just say again, thank you for allowing me to moderate. My name is Matt Simpson. I'm with the Illinois Department of Commerce Office of Minority Economic Empowerment. My role is the African American Business Development Manager. Happy to be in community with you all today. I hope that you all have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the summit.